Hello, everyone. My name is Brennan Pugh, and today we have Herman Steuernagel with us. And he is an author who has written a series of books called I'm going to say it wrong, the Fractured Orbit series, right? And
Okay.
he also has a book called The Bartender Between Worlds. And he also hosts a podcast called The Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse, which I love that title. So welcome to the show, and how you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. It's been a bit of a busy weekend here, but but we're doing good.
Yeah, yeah, same,
Yeah.
same. So why don't you get us started by just telling us who you are, how you got started in all this, and then if you want to even go into maybe how you got your podcast going and where that all came from.
Yeah, sure. So, as Brendan said, my name is Herman Steuernagel, and I am an author. I've been writing I've been published for the last 4 years, but I've been writing since as long as I can remember. Kind of my earliest stories go back as far as grade two that I remember writing. But I got into reading and writing from a young age, but I took a break kind of after college and didn't write anything for a very, very long time. And kind of, yeah, my writing journey kind of hit pause. I hadn't written anything long. I'd written kind of some short stories and started writing on some projects that never really went anywhere until I was the ripe age of 37, and I decided that, actually, it's kind of a meandering story to get there. But what happened was I kind of sold the business that I was running at the time. Kind of left a stressful situation that I had, and I took up running. And some buddies of mine convinced me to do a half marathon with them. And if that doesn't sound like it has anything to do with writing, just bear with me for a little bit. It gets there. Um, so, I basically went from, I mean, I've never been a runner in my life. I really went from couch to half marathon in 3 months. I ended up doing a half marathon with them. Um, and really just because they convinced me to do it with them. And after I completed the half marathon, people were coming up to me and saying, "Hey, Herman, that's great. Congratulations. Way to kick something off your bucket list." And I was like, well, running wasn't really ever on my bucket list. It was just something my idiot friends made me do with them. But that got me to thinking. I had some extra spare time to do some things that I really actually wanted to do. So I thought, well, if I can put the effort into running, something I barely wanted to do, I should probably take the time and make the effort and actually do something that I've always wanted to do, which is write that novel. So from there, I finished the marathon. Actually, we ran the marathon end of October. It was 2019, and November 2019, I started putting down some ideas and started writing my first book, which is actually Lies the Guardian Style, which came out at the end of 2020. So, and from there, once I finished that first book, I realized, hey, this is something I'm capable of doing. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but just like kind of running a half marathon, I put the effort in and got through it. So from there, it was kind of off to the races, and I've been writing ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing how it's so like it's something you want to do so bad, but also writing is really hard. So it's
yeah,
sometimes hard to just like actually do it. you know?
yeah. And it's such an intimidating prospect when you've never done, especially if you've never done it before. To write, 3, 4, 500 pages just seems like such an overwhelming and daunting task that to actually sit down and put the time into it. And it's not just an evening; like you're taking a lot of time to put the story down and trying to make it something that's readable and that other people are going to want to read, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember so I haven't published anything yet. I have a bunch of things kind of in the works, but I remember finishing the first draft of something for the first time,
yeah,
and it took so long to get there, and it was such a struggle, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it's horrible. Like the draft is completely unreadable, needs completely rewritten. But it was like, whoa, I actually like that was so encouraging to just get to a finish line of
for sure. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And then once you get there, and once you get that first draft done, and you get it edited, and you realize this is something I can do, then you know that you can do it again. And I've talked to so many other authors who you get through that first book, and it takes them 1, 3, 5, 10 years, and then their next book takes them 3 to 6 months because they've overcome that hurdle, right? And they
Mhm.
know they can do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So why don't you so how'd that get into the podcast then? Where did that all start at?
Yeah, so I started the podcast pretty much exactly a year ago. And I was I never thought I'd be a podcaster. It's not something that I ever sought out to do. Unlike writing, which is something I'd always wanted to do. But I had been on a couple of podcasts myself, talking about my book Eclipse that it came out at that time. And one of the podcasts that I had been on actually shut down like pretty quickly after I was on it. And I was thinking about it afterwards. I'm like, oh, it was kind of too bad because I didn't know too many podcasts that were science fiction and fantasy based, especially in the indie author sphere. And I thought, well, that's kind of too bad that that avenue for writers to kind of get the word out about their books has gone. And I was talking to my wife about it, and I was like, would I be crazy for adding something else to my plate and
Hmm.
expecting her to say yes? But
Yeah.
she didn't. She was like, no, that sounds like a great idea, and you could call it the greatest podcast in the multiverse. And I was like, okay, well, that seals it. I have to do this now.
Yeah.
And the reason she said that was because so the Bartender Between Worlds is kind of part of a larger series that actually the next book coming out in that series is called The Greatest Pub in the Multiverse. And I had that title already back then a year ago, and I was working on that book. So it's like, well, that actually really fits so perfectly well that I've got to kind of give this a go. It feels like it's meant to be. So I called up a couple of my friends and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being interviewed on this?" I didn't expect it to last more than the 10 episodes I had lined up at the beginning with some author friends that I knew. But here I am a year later, and we're still talking with other authors, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah,
awesome. Yeah, it is similar, slightly different, but kind of similar. When I started doing this, was I kind of looked around and was like, there isn't a whole lot of those like sci-fi fantasy for indie authors.
yeah, exactly.
And I'd grown the YouTube channel to, decent size, still small, but it's got some people.
Yeah,
And so I just thought, hey, maybe, this is big enough to where it might offer those authors something. And same thing, it was like, you know, and then maybe other writers can get value out of it.
yeah, exactly. And that was really where what I wanted was for people to have a platform to talk about their books and really just even chat with other people about science fiction and fantasy because I don't really have that circle of friends in the real life that offer that for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I will have to say it's one of the best things I've done recently because I've met so many cool people. Like, I've just really enjoyed all of a sudden I felt like I entered this world, and like that's how we met, to do this.
Yeah,
Like, I just feel like all of a sudden I'm like, hey, I have this whole new group of friends that I didn't have before.
100%. I totally feel the same way. And like over the course of the last year, I mean, I don't have a huge following on my channel, but that's really what's kept me going is the people I've met, the people I continue to talk to, and the friends that I've made. That was not something I ever expected to come out of podcasting, was making new friends.
Hmm.
But I'm still in touch with a lot of the guests I've had on the show, and been able to chat with them and ask them questions and bounce ideas off of them, and it's really been really an unseen benefit that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. Well, we may come back to the podcast, but let's talk about your
Yeah,
books for
sure.
a little bit.
Yeah, you
So,
bet.
Um, why don't you kind of give us a timeline of when these books have come out, and maybe we'll talk about Fractured Orbit first. How'd that idea come about? How did that process look?
Yeah, so Fractured Orbit came out. The first book was published February of last year, 2023. So it's actually, and that was actually my seventh book that I had published. But that's okay. It's a good starting point because it's kind of where I feel like I fell into my groove of, of writing. So it's actually a good entry point for people reading my stuff. So um, it was actually the result of a short story that I had written. I was in a Facebook group that was putting together. It was a dystopian anthology of dystopian books or dystopian stories set in space.
Hmm.
So I'd written this short story about a individual on a space station orbiting the Earth, and the Earth had died, and humanity had kind of been relegated to this space station. Um, I found out later it's kind of similar to the 100, but that hadn't fallen across my radar. It's a completely different story, but it was a
Hmm.
similar concept. But it was more based on like kind of a silo, Hugh Howey Wolf scenario, that type of thing, but it was set in space. I got to the end of the short story and I realized, there's more to this universe that I haven't explored yet, and I wanted to find out more. So once the short story was done and submitted, I actually just kept writing, and it turned into Eclipse, which is the first book in the Fractured Orbit series. So it's kind of like a Red Rising meets Wool kind of situation, and you know again, they're set in the space station, thinking that they're the only ones left from a catastrophe in Earth's past, but they find out pretty quickly that they're not alone. I did something a little bit different with it in that there's two points of views. One is a point of view on the space station who thinks they're alone, and another one is a point of view outside of the space station from a former space pirate who's actually now transporting goods in between the space stations and the moon and further out in the solar system.
Yeah, that's cool. And then, so is that, so you have 3 books in that? Is that a done series? Are there more coming or?
Yeah, there's more coming. So the first 3 are out now. The plan is for 5. So I'm hoping to wrap that series up in the next year or two, and completely finish that up.
Nice. And then
Yeah.
where does Bartender Between Worlds sit in all that?
Yeah, so The Bartender Between Worlds is a standalone book. It's actually a separate series. It's really a cozy fantasy story. So how that came about is I got to the end of book 3, and I'd published book 2 and 3 in Fractured Orbit 1 month after each other. I kind of wrote them kind of at the same time, but I kind of got ahead of myself and set up the publication date for October, November, thinking, it's all written. It'll be easy just to put it out one after another, and it didn't go that way at all.
Yeah.
So, I totally underestimated how much editing I actually had to do with the books when I set the publication dates, and I kind of was like down to the wire hitting. By the time I got my edits back from my editor, hit upload, and so by the time I got to publishing that book, I was just like burnt out and done. Um, but I didn't want to stop writing because that's, I have the writing bug now. I had to write something, but I just thought I'd take a step back and write something a little less dystopian, a little less high stakes, and, try something a little cozier. So like I'd mentioned, I had this idea a year ago already for this bar type setting called the greatest pub in the multiverse, where um, really the initial concept came from thinking about like what would a beer look like that would be brewed from different places in the multiverse if different ingredients were kind of brought to this multi-dimensional pub. Um, this book ended up being kind of a prequel to that story, and it's about one of the side characters in that novel. But I just wanted to write something that was a lot more fun, lower stakes, and was really just kind of a relaxed journey. Really, it ends up being a journey through the multiverse, is what it is. So I can get into the plot a little bit about it if you want. Really, what we meet this witch hunter who discovers that she has magic. And so she realizes she's in a world of trouble, but her magic is really, instead of being elemental based like fire or water, it's alcohol based. So she can influence drinks, and which is lucky for her because her lifelong dream has to be a bartender. So she's always dreamt of kind of a more relaxed, slow paced job of the bartender instead of being this witch hunter who hunts monsters and hauls in witches. So she runs away to basically the farthest town in the kingdom that she possibly knows of. Um, and her witch hunter partner follows her there, tracks her down, and she meets some unlikely allies in this small town. So she meets a fairy and she meets a scientist that are really end up trying to help her out. And the scientist actually is from another world. He built this device that can traverse the multiverse, and she ends up being able to fix the device with her powers because it's kind of on the same frequency as alcohol for whatever reason. They open a portal and are able to start traveling through the multiverse. So from there, it kind of just becomes a journey of trying to find themselves and figure out who they are and learn from each other. And it's really a fun story from there.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm really I've always been like kind of a hard hitting fantasy guy, like Brandon Sanderson and all the big, like just the big fantasy books. But then I read Lattes and
Legends and Lattes.
Legends and Lattes,
Yeah.
and really liked it. And then I was like, this cozy fantasy thing's not so bad. Like it's kind of cool. So it's nice to take a little break from the heavy stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this has the stakes are a little bit higher than Legends and Lattes. Legends and Lattes was almost a little too low stakes for me, but I've had complaints that the stakes are higher than what most people want out of a cozy fantasy, which is fine. I kind of knew that writing it, and I knew that putting it out there. The second book in the series, which I'm still working on now, is will be closer to that really low stakes and slice of life that Legends and Lattes is. But this book was kind of more about the journey that Emma had to go through to kind of get to where she needed to be in the second book.
Yeah. So here's the big question.
Yeah,
Are you a plotter or a pantser? Like what's where you kind of sit on that
yeah.
path?
I really try to be a plotter, but I fail
Hmm.
miserably. So
Yeah.
I at heart I'm really a pantser. I kind of I do I say I sit in the middle. I think I'm definitely more on the pantsing side. I try to outline, but my story never follows that path. So I don't know why I try. In my head I think I'm saving time by trying to plot it out, but the story I have a general sense of where the story needs to go, but the path that it takes to get there is often not the path I expected it to take.
Hmm.
My first book, I it was straight pantsing. I didn't try to outline it. That book was mostly for me just to prove to myself that I could write a novel length book. Um, with Eclipse, it ended up being, I'd say I probably outlined it to some degree, but when I got to the end of my first draft, I was surprised myself with what actually had to happen, and I had to go back and rework it.
Hmm.
With Chimera and Resurgence, which are books 2 and 3 in that series, part of the reason why I released it October, November, and it came out the way it did was it was supposed to be one book, but I knew where the endpoint of that book needed to be, and it took me 900 pages to get there. And because
Yeah.
Eclipse was 300 pages, I didn't want to release a 900-page book too.
Hmm.
So I ended up
Right.
kind of like splitting it and reworking kind of that middle section so it could function as their own books. So yeah, like as much as I try to outline, it doesn't really work out for me. So yeah, I'm a pantser at heart.
I think I definitely am kind of the same. I love the idea of outlining, and I definitely I definitely have general ideas of where things should be,
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, like all of a sudden I'm just like, well, this doesn't follow anything that it follows the general like idea of where I thought I should go, but not at all like how or what or all the little details of everything, but you
yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah, I've been working on this follow up on the greatest pub in the multiverse, and I actually went. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to write mini chapters instead of trying to write an outline. And what I went and I started actually writing paragraphs. I'm like, okay, this is going to happen here and next on the next chapter, trying to trick my brain into thinking it was pantsing while I was actually really outlining. And now that I'm in the drafting, I didn't do it for the whole book. I kind of got to a certain point. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start writing now, and I'm already way off where I thought I was going to going to be with it. Just
Yeah.
it doesn't work out for me, but I'll probably continue to try. In
Yeah.
my head, I'm saving words, but yeah,
I think it's nice to attempt it at least
mm,
I think for me it's more like brainstorming. You kind of like
yeah,
you're kind of figuring it out and you think you know where it's going to go, but ultimately that's not what happens. But so I wonder about so I don't know how to ask this question. So it sounds like you had a book or you had the greatest pub in the multiverse, and then you kind of made a prequel of it, and then you were writing a book. You wrote the second book, and then you thought, well, it should be three. Do you think like, oh, this is going to be a 5 book series? Do you just kind of see how far it's going to go? Like, how does that work for you?
yeah. So for yeah, that's a great question. For Fractured Orbit, it was originally going to be a trilogy, because what I thought was going to be book two ended up being the length of 2 books, and it expanded it. And the reason why I chose 5 now for Fractured Orbit is because I actually have the next 2 titles planned, and I really alluded to what those 2 titles were going to be in books 2 and 3. So I really want to keep the scope into that. I'm really not gonna let myself go beyond that. I have an idea of where the story goes and where it needs to end up to actually wrap it up. So it's not like I'm just gonna be writing into the dark to get there. But it's gonna be an exercise in really controlling my word count and keeping it to 5 book series. And if those 2 books end up being a bit longer, that's perfectly fine. I kind of set up books 1 to 3 increasing in length. Um, so if these two if they end up each being 500 pages, that's completely fine. It's not going to be the jump from the 300 to 900, which just didn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
I'm still kind of have the original trilogy that I had in mind. Really, what happened in book 2 is I added a third point of view, which kind
Mhm.
of expanded the word count. I wasn't planning on doing that, but a character kind of was stubborn and didn't want to be shoved to the side. She
Sure.
decided very much that she had her own story to tell, which was its own interesting process. But each point of view kind of really has their own direction now that they need to follow and kind of pull back to the end.
Yeah. Is there like is there an amount of point of views you like, or does it really matter? You just kind of whatever serves the story.
Yeah, I tend to two kind of seems to kind of be my sweet spot of what I like to control the handle. Three was a lot. Three was quite a bit to juggle because they were in three different places. So we were following really three different stories that now need to be converged back together, and trying to figure out the timing of each of them, where they were at a certain point in time, was again part of what ended up taking me longer to craft those two books, because I all of a sudden in one part I'd written months, and the next chapter it's hours later, and it's like, well, that doesn't work. I need to kind of really make this flow to seem like these three stories are happening concurrently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I read something about, I think Brandon Sanderson does, like he writes like this one person's point of view the whole way, and then he
yeah,
writes the next one, and then he like mixes it all. Like that seems really hard. I
yeah, that's what I ended up doing for those two books. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take this point of view, write it to the end, and that's where I ran into problems with the timing, because I had just
Mhm.
written them like separately from each other, and because I'm like partially pantsing this, like it was pretty hard to kind of mesh the chapters in with each other so that it made sense in a in a linear fashion.
Yeah,
I feel like I got there by the end, but it did take quite a bit of editing.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Do you as far as your like how you go about writing, do you have any kind of rituals, ways you do it? Do you just write whenever you can? Like how's your writing process that way?
Yeah, so ideally, if I can get up early, which happens more or less all the time. Sometimes I'm not able to write when I do, but I get up at 5 in the morning. So ideally, if I can write, kind of between 5:30 and 7, that's when I kind of get my best words out before I go off to the day job. Then, if I'm feeling up to it, I'll write a little bit in the evening, kind of right before I fall asleep. I'll kind of just like be half asleep and like putting out words. So my wife is asking me, "How can you type when your eyes are closed?" I'm just like,
Yeah.
"Just let me type. It's coming."
Just leave me alone. I get
Yeah.
it's all here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like on the weekend, if I really enjoy like heading to a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon, and trying to get out a few thousand words as well, if I can do that. So those are kind of the where I work around. Having the podcast has kind of interrupted that schedule a little bit. I don't really get as much in the evening anymore, which is okay. Like that wasn't the prime time. The morning is really the prime time for me. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the flow of how I work.
Yeah. So your wife, I'm sure obviously she's quite supportive now of things. When you first told her you wanted to write a book, when you first told her you started a podcast, how did she react to a lot of those things?
Yeah, I mean, my wife is super supportive. Like, I'm really fortunate and lucky. Like, I mean, she's always known that I have wanted to write a book. It's something that she had always known that was part of something I'd wanted to do. So she was super encouraging and really excited that I finally was going to do this. And yeah, with the podcast as well. Like, I kind of take over our desk space in the house when I'm doing interviews, and it kind of interrupts the flow of her day. But I'm really fortunate. She's super encouraging and really, yeah, supportive of everything I'm trying to do here. So yeah, I'm really lucky that way. I know not everyone is that lucky and has the supportive spouse that really understands the desire to do this, but she's an artist as well and a photographer, so she kind of gets the creative.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife's the same. She's we've been married 16 years now, and
Yeah,
she
yeah, same as us.
yeah, I've done a lot of creative things. Like I'm a musician originally, and
Like,
I've been in bands, and now I want to write. And like she calls it creative ADD because I just kind of like being doing stuff. But she's also creative too. Like I told you before we started, she owns a dance studio, so
right.
we do a lot of creative stuff together and separately. So that was, the
Yeah,
hardest thing probably has been the when we did the YouTube channel. Um, and just like I had to kind of prove, like, not that she wasn't supportive, but I definitely had to prove that like I was taking it seriously and that I was going to do it long enough that would actually pay off.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, because YouTube is one of those where it's like, who knows? Like you may work, may not work, but you just have to do it long enough.
Exactly.
So it was kind of that she was supportive, but prove that it's worth the amount of time that I spend doing it, you know?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because it is. I mean, kind of like writing it. I mean, it's taken me, 4 years to the point where I feel like now my books are kind of doing well enough to justify, from financially doing them. Um, and the podcast, I kind of see it's the same way. It's a bit of a grind to 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 get it to where I've got the listenership and the audience to kind of say, okay, this is a, and I mean, it's not that it doesn't have intrinsic value in of its own. I would write anyway. Podcasting is maybe not something that if I were to drop one of the two, that would be the one to drop. But as I mentioned before, I mean the relationships and the knowledge that I've gained from other people and interacting with them has really been what the value in doing the podcast has been. But yeah, to your point, I'll just pull that up here for my wife being supportive and working together. This book actually, so I ran a Kickstarter for this book, and one of the tiers in the Kickstarter was illustrations, adding additional illustrations to the book. So my wife added actually
Wow,
did some
that's
of the
awesome.
illustrations for the book. So in the market copies, they're black and white. In the Kickstarter, they're actually colored. So she added some color to the drawings, and we added additional ones in there. The Kickstarter is done, but yeah. So this was kind of the first project that we kind of collaborated on, and she did some of the sketches for me in there. So and we had drink cards as well for the Kickstarter. She took the photos for the because I mentioned she's a photographer. So yeah, she's super supportive and willing to do stuff like that for me. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's super fun that you can collaborate in that way, especially my that's a skill I have never possessed is like drawing at all. Like I just
Yeah,
have no way of doing it. And so that's always been something I've had to find people to like do any kind of illustration
yeah,
or yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. I've kind of dabbled here and there in painting and sketching and stuff, but it's not something that I would ever consider doing as a anything to share with the world.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and so I was just thinking back about our we were talking about the podcast there and like the time it takes to do it. I think I don't know what you would say about this, but I would tell anyone that is thinking about starting writing or anything like that, or really any creative field, I guess. To they you got to be willing to do it for a long time
Yeah,
because you are not going to find it's going to be very rare to find success immediately.
exactly.
So, do you have any words of wisdom about that? I suppose.
Yeah, I think, for me, and what I've gleaned off of other authors over the course of especially the last year is you really kind of have to know why you want to write in the first place. One of my podcast questions is actually, what motivates you? Why do you write? Um, and you really have to kind of know that if you're in it just to make a quick buck, there are probably better ways to make a quick buck than writing because it's not easy and it's not definitely not guaranteed.
Yeah.
And it's a long haul. A lot of authors get 20, 30 books out there and aren't making money on them. And you have to, I guess, really be honest with yourself and ask, if that's me, if that's the case, would I still write? And hopefully the answer is yes. And you kind of have to really determine why you do write. What's the motivation? And most authors that have a long career, they need to get their stories down. They want to share their, either their creative spark in that way. They have these stories in their head that they want to share. So that's kind of for me what I look at is why are you in this for the long haul?
Mhm.
And the second thing that I'd probably say is, find friends, find other writers that can support and encourage you that you can go to and ask questions of because it can be a lonely journey especially for us authors, we're mostly introverts, I think.
Mhm.
So we like to kind of sit behind our keyboard and pump out our stories and then try to figure it out ourselves. I certainly did that at the beginning,
Mhm.
but just realizing that there's so many authors out there that are willing to share and talk about what they do and help out. I know that was a big benefit for me running my Kickstarter campaign. If I didn't have people to kind of ask about, different things and how to do it, I'd really be lost in the weeds
Yeah.
because it's a completely different platform to anything else that I've really worked on. And I mean, I work on computers all day, so I'm not a stranger to it, but it's a different different avenue for sure. So yeah, just having that support networking community that's really key. For me, other than getting the stories out, just connecting with the community and being involved in the writing community, I mean, is a big reason why I would keep going because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I would totally agree. I saw, I'm not going to say it exact, but I saw a quote or something from C.S. Lewis, and he basically was kind of what you just said, where was don't become a writer to be a writer, become a writer because you want to tell stories.
Yeah.
Like, if you're doing it just because, like, I think the idea of being a writer sounds fun, that's not a good enough reason.
Yeah, right.
And then I would also say too about the meeting the people. We talked about it a little bit before, but like we've had a few of the same guests on our podcast too. So the break-ins, that group of people, they've been super fun to meet. And I before I started doing the podcast, I really had been kind of in a writing slump. Like I just wasn't motivated to do it. I was like, I don't like. I'm just kind of was in that slog mode. But just talking to everyone that I've talked to has gotten me really out of that and more motivated. Like seeing everyone
Definitely.
be successful and like doing it, I'm like, hey, kind of finding another wind about it. So
Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to Joshua Walker, who is
mhm.
one of the founders of the Break-ins,
He's
actually.
great.
Yeah,
He's a cool guy.
yeah. So he's actually on my show this coming week. But I was talking to him because he was one of the two people that started that group, and just talking to him about why. And it was really just that he realized that he needed friends to help him like kind of work through some of these questions about marketing and encouraging each other to write and that sort of thing. Um, and he had the foresight to take a look and say, okay, like this could be a lonely journey, or I could find some friends who are also probably lonely in trying to do this, and we can work together, and so it's not so lonely after all. And it is surprising that more authors, especially now with you know the technological abilities that we have to connect,
Yeah.
don't do that and form online writing groups. I really think that it's nothing but beneficial for people
Hmm.
to get out and share their experiences with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited for Josh's book coming out. I read the novella not too long ago, and I've got an episode with him coming out on the 30th. And so really excited about his book and all their books. They're cool. I'm just down with it.
Yeah,
So marketing. How do you go about marketing? A lot of people I've talked to super loathe it and hate everything about it. Some have not hated it so much. I've never met
yeah.
anyone who likes it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I like it either. It's really for me it's been throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks has been my marketing strategy. And for better or for worse, it takes a lot of time to try to figure out something that works, and I haven't done myself any favors by writing in multiple genres.
Mhm,
From what I hear, at least from people who stuck to one genre, if you write, space opera and all you write is space opera, then you build an audience over time, right? For me, I haven't had that luxury. So, what I've been doing, what's worked well for me is interviews like this, to be honest. Like, I've done a lot of interviews this year, especially for the Bartender Between Worlds. That's helped me find a bit of an audience. TikTok for this book has worked. I loathe doing TikTok.
mhm,
I don't, my TikToks aren't clever. They're just me holding up my book with text over top, and that's all I have the bandwidth for, to be
mhm,
honest. But um, I've gotten a lot of reviews that are saying I saw this on TikTok and picked it up because of that. So that's as much feedback as I've ever gotten from anything, any form of marketing that I've ever tried. So um, other than that, Facebook ads haven't done anything for me. Amazon ads. For this book, they work, but not well enough to be profitable. I feel like if I have a few books in this series, and Amazon ads might work to, once you get some read through, I feel like it might work. But for the standalone, it hasn't quite hit. Um, yeah, so right now it's kind of TikTok and interviews like this has really been the path I followed.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's such a crapshoot with all that stuff. Like I've done, with various businesses, I've done Facebook ads, and I, I've never found anything where I'm like, this is the silver bullet that's going to do it. I just don't. Whatever. Honestly, the only thing that I have found that works is like, don't stop. Like,
Right.
just keep doing it. Get
Yeah,
that next subscriber, the next subscriber, and just keep going.
definitely. Yeah, and I feel like, it's they talk some marketing advice that you pick up along the way talks about the seven touch points of of your customer or your reader. Really someone has to see your book 7 times before they actually are willing to pick it up and give it a try. So
Mhm.
as long as you're out there in these different platforms and different avenues and people keep seeing you over and over again, then eventually maybe they'll pick up your book, right? And I've had that people say, I see you everywhere. I've seen you, like I said, all over TikTok and Instagram, and people sharing and that sort of thing. Once you get people sharing your stuff, that's kind of, I feel, key. But people need to see that repetitiveness over and over again. So even if it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over again, um,
Mhm.
you know, people aren't as invested in your book as you are.
Mhm.
So to they need to hear it a few times before, they're like, hey, yeah, that actually just sounds like something I want to read. Or if it's me, like, I forget. So like I might hear of a book that I'm really interested in, and then the next day I've forgotten about it already because I have 50 other things to do. Uh,
Yeah.
Everyone's in the same boat these days,
Yeah.
right? So if they hear about your book next week and then they hear about it again next month, oh yeah, I need something to read. Why don't I pick that book up? I
Well, and
feel like that's
we have so much marketing happening at us all the time. So I think
absolutely,
that's part of the problem is,
yeah.
you get so used to just seeing ads for everything, and you're just like, I don't want to see any more ads.
Yeah, and you tune it out after a while, right? So I feel like that's why I feel like Facebook ads, at least I found, they don't work. I know some people have great success with them, which is fantastic. And if you do, then that's great. Keep doing it. If you find something that works, keep doing it. That's why I like these interviews. It's because if someone's sitting to listen to your show for an hour, it's because they like listening to your show and they're going to listen to me talk for an hour. And hopefully
Mhm.
the message is, you know, sticks a little bit longer than the Facebook ad they saw for 2 seconds, right?
Yeah, my whole marketing strategy has basically been like, let's just do a YouTube channel and grow an audience, and then someday when I have a book to publish, I have an audience.
I think that's fantastic. I think that's, you know, the advice that I've heard over and over again is build a platform, whether that's newsletters or YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, whatever you're comfortable on. If you build that audience and build that platform, eventually, and you're doing it before you have something to sell, people aren't feeling like you're selling to them.
Yeah.
You're providing content, you're providing interviews from other people they want to hear, and then like, oh yeah, this guy actually has a book too. So they'll check that out. So
Mhm.
I don't think that's a bad way to do it, and you're also not doing it to sell a product. You're providing content that people want.
Yeah, well, and actually, that was the whole reason it's called Writing Quest. Is I literally started it under the premise of I'm on a writing quest. Like,
Right.
I have not published a book. I don't really know. Like, I'm learning as I go. So it was really that premise of like, if you want to follow along, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And that's, the same, kind of with, my podcast as well. When I have a book release, I mention it on the show and I talk about my writing experiences as well with how I work. But the point of my podcast isn't to sell my book. It's to, talk to other authors and give writing advice and hopefully sell their books. But whether or not my podcast has sold any of my books, I don't know. But that's not why I'm
yeah,
doing it either.
yeah, for sure. What do you what made you go the self-publish route as opposed to attempting the, or did you attempt the traditional route and then decided to go self-publish?
Yeah, when I first started writing that first book, I didn't know that self-publishing was a viable option. It had been years before I'd even considered publishing. So in my mind, traditional publishing was just the way you published. But as I was writing it, I was listening to other podcasts. And I was listening to Joanna Penn's podcast, The Creative Pen, and I stumbled across Jenna Moressi's YouTube channel. I was listening to her, and both of them are self-published. So as I was listening to them while during kind of my working day, and then writing in the evening, I kind of thought, okay, so this self-publishing seems like a viable option. People are doing it, and I don't have to worry about querying. I don't have to worry about that whole process, finding an agent. I can just kind of put it up, and that's it. So that appealed to me because I'm impatient. I didn't want to write a book, refine it, and then have to find an agent, wait a year, and then wait a year. If someone happened to pick it up, wait another year to get it published.
Yeah.
I wanted results right away.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted, control over the process as well. I have an option to do it myself. I'll do it myself. That's kind of just my personality.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, whether that was it was probably the right path for that first book. Now, if that's not to say I'll never go the traditional publishing route, I'm definitely open to it. But yeah, my reasoning for it was more just to kind of see where things took me and kind of maintain that control and get it, write it and get.
Yeah. Do you think that so there's obviously there's pros and cons to going both routes. One of the things so Brandon Sanderson famously called out Amazon and Audible for their whole thing during his Kickstarter. And there's a lot of things with traditional publishing where they take control of everything and you don't get a say and all that. Do you think that the rise in self-publishing will kind of force the traditional publishers to be a little more favorable to the artists?
I Yeah, I would hope so.
Mhm.
I feel like if they don't, then they're really in a losing battle. Because I've heard traditional published authors talk about self-publishing and how it's a better option, and how then if traditional publishing picks you up, they're giving you a decent offer because they know that you've proven your value as a self-published author already, and they really have the volume that self-published authors don't, right?
Mhm.
So I would hope so. Now,
Yeah.
at the same time, do I have faith that they will? Not really.
Mhm.
So um, either they're going to have to adapt or they're going to be obsolete.
Yeah.
The what they big pro that they have is that they control the brick and mortar stores at this point.
Mhm.
It's harder for a self-published author to get into a brick and mortar stores, but most of self-published authors are making their money through ebooks and audiobooks anyway.
Mhm.
So may or may not be what helps traditional publishing in the end is controlling those, right? Bookstores are, the big box stores, um, yeah, are having issues, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, so we talked a little bit about this, but my wife and I are starting a bookstore.
Yeah,
I will tell you, getting into that whole process, I have not only learned about how many indie bookstores there are out there, like just these small little hole in the wall bookstores, that like I have direct access to buy indie books where we
yeah,
get them from our distributor and stuff. And so I think the indie bookstore and indie authors kind of coming together can really change a lot of that
100%.
stuff. Because I'm very much like I want to have every indie book that I can in there. You know.
Yeah, right. And I think that's, and I think that's definitely a different vessel too. Like indie bookstores working with indie authors just makes sense. And I think
Hmm.
more people are willing to go to an indie store and support an independent bookseller than necessarily like a Barnes and Noble that's not really offering anything more than Amazon is, other than physical location that you have to drive to anyway, right? But
Hmm.
um, for a small independent bookstore to be able to bring in indie authors, I mean, that's really a gift, and I think that's something that indie authors are gonna take advantage more of, I believe.
Do you think I remember when like iPads and ebooks and all that kind of stuff came out.
Mhm.
I heard you heard it everywhere. That's the death of the paper book. It's all paper is going away. There's no paper. Obviously, that has not happened. I personally, I would much rather have a physical book. Is kind of I do read ebooks and stuff, but I would much rather have a physical book. Do you think we'll ever see a time where ebooks decline and we end up just with more, or it's just kind of 50-50 like it is now?
Yeah, I feel like we'll probably find an equilibrium at some point if we haven't already. I feel like ebooks have their place. I enjoy ebooks for traveling. I enjoy ebooks for reading at night, like in bed, so I don't have to turn the light on to read while she's sleeping. Um, I agree with you. I enjoy having a physical book on my shelf as well. I mean, but there's something to be said to being able to spend a couple bucks and get an ebook versus 20, $30 to get paperback or hardcover. But that being said, um, you know, platforms like TikTok and Instagram have really, I think, revived paper books, where you see the special editions and you see people wanting to show off their books and their bookshelves and that sort of thing, really taking a more interest in the last few years, right? So I think
Hmm.
that has buoyed the physical book market as well. Um, yeah, I don't know if we'll see ebooks decline. I mean, what'll happen is people like me will buy an ebook because it's $2 and it'll sit on the Kindle for 5 years
Yeah,
and they won't read it, right? So I think it's another. And I have books that I've bought the ebook, the physical book, and the audio book, right? So I
right.
think it's just another avenue for authors to utilize and reach different.
Yeah. I do that a lot too. I end up with I have the ebook, the audiobook, and then I get the real book, and then
Yeah,
I think I have a problem. I don't know. Yeah.
no, I don't think so.
So you said you're working on as we're kind of on that 45 minutes, so we'll get pushing an hour. So you're working on your continuation of the bartender series, is what I'll call it. Do you have anything else in the works that Obviously, I mean, I'm sure you have like a million ideas, like we all do, but you have anything else that's kind of you're getting close to working on?
Yeah. So I mean, book four in the Fractured Orbit series has kind of been the back of my mind for the last year or so as I've kind of been working on this series. So that's still upcoming. I've been working on idea in the brainstorming phase. I kind of know where it's going, but I still have that in the back of my head as I'm going. I have an epic fantasy book that I started a couple of years ago, actually, that I've slowly been picking away at. So that's kind of in the works as well. Yeah, tons of ideas out there
Yeah,
for sure.
for sure.
Yeah,
I'm always an epic fantasy guy. That's the only I joked with my brother. My brother writes too, so we talk a lot about it. And I only have the one world in my head. I have a bunch of ideas in that one world, but like I don't
yeah,
have any other worlds.
right.
So, you know,
No, and that's good. And like yeah, I've got two. I feel like I have too many tendrils out there. I need to kind of like bring stuff together a bit. So it'll be nice to get Fractured Orbit wrapped up, just so I have one less universe to think of. Um, the epic fantasy that I'm working on that I didn't realize when I started it 2 years ago is going to be kind of in the same multiverse as the cozy fantasy is.
Mhm.
So it's all kind of going to tie together. And the benefit of working on a couple of books at the same time is I can put Easter eggs in for
Yeah,
for the future series that aren't going to be in the world for a couple of years, but have been in my head for a while.
yeah. Do you like having multiple books? Like, does it help? Like, if you end up with writer's block or something, where you're kind of stuck on one and you can just switch over to the other and keep things fresh. Do you like having that?
Yeah, you would think so, but no, not really. It's I have a hard time flipping back and forth like that, so I tend to kind of be working on one project while I've got ideas brewing for other things in the back of my mind, but I want to get this one done, so something's off my list.
Yeah.
So I don't really flip back and forth. I Not that I haven't in the past. That's kind of what happened with the epic fantasy. I was working on that one. I was working on Fractured Orbit, and I was flipping back and forth a little bit between that. But then kind of Fractured Orbit took all of my time and kind of went from there. So I feel like I do want to start a project and continue it out. Now, that being said, I flipped from Fractured Orbit into this series, but my actual writing time flipping back and forth is a bit tougher for my brain to handle.
Yeah. What about switching between sci-fi to fantasy? Is that tough too to do that?
No, not really. I've been a sci-fi fan as long as I can remember. My earliest memories of science fiction were watching Star Trek: The Next Generation with my dad when I
Mhm.
was 7 or 8. So and I was probably watching the original series before that, and I just can't remember it, right? So science fiction has always been a part of my interest and what I like to consume. Fantasy I found a little bit later, but not much. I was 13 by the time I picked up Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. That was my kind of entryway into classic fantasy. Um, Both have been genres that I enjoy, that I'll watch, that I'll read. So it's not hard flipping back and forth between them. It is a bit of a different mindset, but it kind of all comes from the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very similar in a lot of ways, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. The sci-fi takes a little bit more thought, a little bit more research and crafting. Especially Fractured Orbit's kind of based in. It's not based in a galaxy far, far away or anything. It's based in our potential Earth future where we're kind of between Earth and Mars and the Moon. So there's a little bit of more science involved that I had to kind of make sure I had some semblance of reality, but at the same time, there's some elements in there that probably don't make any scientific sense at this point, but maybe one day they will, like artificial gravity, right? Like
Right.
you got to include some of that stuff,
Yeah. That's why I like fantasy, because you can just make up whatever you want.
right?
you know, Pretty much
Yeah.
you can justify it almost anyway. So I
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough.
So as we kind of wrap up, if
Hmm.
you had like two or three, maybe four, like big pieces of advice for a new writer, someone who's on this journey? What are those things that you tell them?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I think finding other writers that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can work with, and just really team up with to kind of move forward in your writing career. I think that's definitely one of the best pieces of advice I can give. It's definitely changed how I've looked at my writing process over the last year, and just keep at it. I mean, there are definitely days that are harder than others. There's definitely days where you're wondering why you're doing what you're doing and beating your head against the wall to try to get people to find you and find your book. But if it's if it's what you want to do, just you kind of have to weather the hard days and look at the good days and remember why you're doing it. And that goes back to why I said, know why you're doing it, know the motivation behind your writing and why you're writing in the first place, and remember that as you're going, because it's not always easy.
Um,
There's often days where you're going to wonder why you're doing it, and just
yeah.
Realize that once you know why you are and you have that foundation, just keep at it and you'll eventually get there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, this has been really fun. It's been
Yeah,
awesome.
it's been great.
Great meeting you. And so where can we find you? Where can we find the books? All that kind of
Yeah, the best place to start is my website, hermansteuernagel.com. I realize that is hard to spell, but
we'll put it in the description, so it'll be there.
Perfect. Yeah, so you can also find me on Instagram. Like I mentioned before, I'm on TikTok. Instagram is at Herman Steuernagel. TikTok is at Herman Steuernagel Writes. And you can also find my podcast just by looking for the greatest podcast in the multiverse on your favorite platform of choice.
Yeah, perfect. It's awesome. We'll put all that down there in the description and with links to your books and all that. And like I said before, I'm going to have some in my bookstore, so I just ordered a few copies, so we got
Thank you so much. Appreciate that so much. Yeah. And thank you for having me on the show today. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks everyone for watching. My name is Brennan Pugh. This is Writing Quest, and we will see you next time.